welcome to you. And one of the issues that we face this week is that we've got a very long passage, it being Palm/Passion Sunday, with different traditions around that. So I won't beat around the bush, except to say to Jenny from Pukeroa Bay, welcome. Welcome back for all of you. Michael, Anderson's Bay in Otago. Bishop Steve, Anderson's Bay in Otago, but slightly higher up the hill by memory. And I'm somewhere between Arrowtown and Queenstown. Lovely to be with you. Jenny, we've got a lot of work to do.
I actually think we must begin by saying it's a terrible and frightening reading, and we should have a warning. That's where it ends, though. That's where the hope is, where it ends, and we'll come back to that later. So if you're going to do the whole thing, remember you need to warn your people that it's what Williams called a very chilling and strange text. So the background stuff is important, and it would seem that this story existed in something like this form before any of the evangelists wrote. It's got the allusions to the Hebrew scriptures in Psalm 22 and 69, and the servant song of Isaiah, and possibly the story took shape in liturgical commemorations of the death of Jesus, and people were familiar with the pattern of it. So that's an important piece of background. Also, it is not 21st century New Zealand. It is set in a Mediterranean culture, and two key elements belong here. Honor and shame is really important. And Jesus had managed to avoid being shamed most of all his ministry through his being very clever, both by being attempts made by his friends and his enemies to shame him. But here we come across something that is absolutely appalling. And in the end, his true honor is shown in resurrection. But honor and shame is an important theme of the background. Pain and suffering in the ancient world is really about the fact that it's the soul, not the body, that felt pain and suffering. And Jesus bore the suffering almost stoically until we get to the point of, why have you abandoned me? So the theme of abandonment, of suffering, and of victimhood is huge in there, and we need to be careful with it and understand the background is not what we would assume as 21st century Kiwis.
Thanks, Jenny. And let's unpack that with what else we find challenging, because you've thrown an interpretive gauntlet at our feet, and I think it's absolutely right. But Michael, let's hear you respond, what you personally find challenging.
Well, my first thought was, I feel there's relatively few involved in what is really a really dark episode, what Jenny was saying. While other people were just continuing with their day, they were kind of getting ready up in the morning. And yet just over the fence, over the wall, there was something really unjust and horrible happening. And yet most people were just continuing on their day. So for me, the challenge simply is for us today is to take notice of what is going on around us, over the fence, over the wall, and being watchful. So that's it for me.
That's a fascinating little side glance. It's a helpful one as well. Let's carry on though and hear from you, Bishop Steve. Challenge.
Sure, challenge. Truly, this man was God's son. It's the last words that we have read. And that takes me right back to the beginning of the gospel. This is the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. And we are then meant to see in the next 15 chapters the life of Jesus and to see God's son. But in fact, we are seeing a man who has, we've just been abandoned, deserted, humiliated, crucified, and dies. So for me, the challenge is, how do we make sense of that opening verse? This is the good news, the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, with someone who has just died. And so I guess the fact that we're all standing here is that someone must have told us there's good news there. And of course, we go to the end of the gospel, just one more chapter. And as Jenny says, we do need to look at this in the light of the resurrection. But again, we're left with women rushing away, frightened, terrified, saying nothing to anyone. But still, we are here. So someone must have told us. Someone must have told the person that told us. Someone going right back must have told Mark. And that's a challenge for me. What are we doing about telling people about this, injustice, but also the presence of God in that injustice and the presence of God in the justice of the world today?
Absolutely. What an incredible construction Mark has on as an instinctive storyteller, and yet so powerful. Jenny, do you have any personal challenges when you read this?
Oh, heaps about victimhood, about indecency, and there's a lot of work being done at the moment on abuse, the abuse of Jesus. Not sure I'd touch that in a public sermon, but it is pretty horrific, and it's full of personal challenge. You know, Mark's gospel spends a third of its time on the last week of Jesus's life. Matthew and Luke have a seventh. This is the real focus of Mark, who's often so stark and clear, and this is where his energy goes. So it's vitally important, as Steve says. And the challenge to me is I always want to avoid looking at Jesus on the cross. Reading this again, I dug out my very favourite painting, which is Christ of St. John on the cross, and looked at it in its very large reproduction that I have, and I thought, I avoid it, but we mustn't. We're invited to sit with Jesus at the cross in all its indecency.
And so the temptation to run away with all the men, and we have to resist that. Let's hear that starkness, but let's begin to find good news. Just as an aside, it's interesting to note how poorly frequented Good Friday services are these days by comparison with Easter Day. But let's go and find some good news and go to you, Michael, first. Where do you find that happening?
Well, I know we've mentioned the thing about hope and resurrection, but I'm not there. I'm in the dark place, really. So for me, there is an invitation here, which is to be drawn to walk past the courtyard. If you can imagine the ash of the smouldering fire, walking through the gate, and then bear witness to what is actually happening. Sort of locate yourself, if you like, in one of these scenes. And I think N.T. Wright describes this passage as being multiple snapshots, and they're all gathered together, these cars, and they've been flipped in front of our eyes very quickly. But just to stay in one of them and be present in it, even though it's comfortable and it's horrible.
Thank you. Not an easy challenge, not easy good news in a way. Jenny, for you, give us some good news just yet.
Some good news is that we don't have to be afraid of abandonment, of darkness. We can stay in it. I was talking to a Presbyterian friend today about Holy Saturday, and she said, we don't call it that. Well, I said, we don't do anything with it at all. But the Saturday experience is staying in the unknown, in the darkness, identifying with the victim. And we have victims all around us in this world today, and it's easy to not want to sit with people or to sit in our own abandonment. But we can have courage because Jesus has been there first. And somehow Jesus has been raised from the dead and accompanies us even in the darkest places.
Bishop Steve will know that I'm a fan of a book which absolutely focuses on Holy Saturday as the place where we need to dwell, a book by a man called Alan Lewis. Bishop Steve, can you give us some good news as well at this point?
Difficult, I have to say. I think I agree with Michael that this is a moment of reflection and awareness of the extent to which God is prepared to go. Yes, along with Jenny, I'm saying, yes, Jesus has been there first and been there with us, perhaps, in that sense. I suppose the other part of good news is that all the promises made by God in the Old Testament are now being fulfilled in Jesus. So we see a number of setups in the Old Testament always falling short, and only as Jesus is fulfilled do we see God's plan of redemption. Horrific and very much on God's own. Jesus is made a point of being abandoned. Even the women are not at the foot of the cross as they are with John. They're from a distance looking on. So this is God working in God and God alone there. So I suppose it's not looking on anybody apart from perhaps Simon of Cyrene being the only person that is being seen around to be helping Jesus at that stage. So maybe there is a case of when we are called to take up our cross, we can see that someone has done that as well.
And quite an unusual little scene, a little glimpse we get of Simon of Cyrene. Well, we're coming to the Holy Week and the trials and the demands of it, but I'd like to know what it all means. So, Michael, can I ask you, so what?
Oh, the so what? Well, I'm still there. I'm not in the so what position really. I've got to who are we? So
Mhm.
that's where I am in this passage, and I'm thinking about responding to that invitation. Am I like Pilate? I'm the one who kind of wants to just get through the day and as easy as possible, which was Passover without a riot. Am I the soldier mocking Jesus, or am I just another soldier following what is expected? Who is really the real Michael in this? So those are the kind of things I'm
Mm.
myself, the naked Michael, if you like, that kind of strip back. What is, who do I end up sitting beside? Am I like Barabbas? Can't believe it, got away with murder. Is that the reality? So
And
there
he's
we are.
another interesting little bit part in this play. Steve, for you, so what?
So what? Truly, this man was God's son, someone who
Yeah.
was there, who was involved with this, somehow in the death of Jesus, recognize that God was working in there somehow. How this person made sense of it later on, what developed, I don't know. So I think the so what for me is this, am I seeing God's son? Or am I seeing a good man martyred, a tragic mistake, or am I seeing God at work here?
And an unlikely source for that quite remarkable proclamation, which is
Yeah.
something we can tease out in coffee table conversations as well. Jenny, for you, so what?
I agree absolutely with Steve. It's like the messianic secret may make some sense in the end. Jesus saying, "Don't tell anybody that I've healed people. Don't keep quiet about this. Don't do anything," because it makes no sense at all until we get to verse 39. Truly, this man was God's son, and I can accept that or not from the most, as you say, the most unlikely source. And if Mark was largely shaped by Peter's memories, he's completely absent in chapter 15. He's just not there at all. So, which actually reinforces the point that it may have been some sort of liturgical going around the sites of Jerusalem because it's so clearly located. This is real stuff. It seems to have really happened in the city of Jerusalem around these specific places that are named. And the biggest reality of it all is truly this man was the Son of God.
There's very little we can or should add to that, and Mark wouldn't want us to. So let's, with great appreciation for Mark and for all of you, for Michael, Jenny, and Bishop Steve, thank you for delving into this stuff.